Hello, everybody. My name is Mr. Big T Anderson, and today we're doing a fanfiction reading of How Many Dishes Does It Take to Repair a Relationship? This is done by Spaceboy22. Links are down below to both the author and to the fanfiction itself. I'm going to get a drink here, because if I don't, when I do this, I'm going to be in trouble. If you've been with me since the beginning, that was a flashback, I'm sure. Anywho, let's begin. The wooden door of Dawn Winery creaked open slightly, reminding D-Luke that he needed to get the hinges oiled later that day. Closing the door and locking it behind himself, he made sure that it was secure before putting the key into his pocket, shrugging off his coat and draping it over his arm. The weekend morning sunrise had risen far enough into the sky to send its warm glow in through the large and intricate windows of the winery, meaning that D-Luke wouldn't need to stir any of the lights yet. The golden rays were plenty for him to see what he needed to take care of right away, and it would be brighter by the time he'd really need to see what he was doing. The previous Friday night had been rather hectic, unfortunately, meaning that not all of the nightly cleaning had been accomplished like it usually was. It wasn't because of wild customers, at least this time, but instead because of a sudden attack that had required D-Luke's Dark Knight persona. Certainly, his staff was more than capable of handling the winery, but D-Luke had sent them home and closed early just in case. Most of the cleaning left was just a few dishes and a bit of sweeping, so D-Luke figured that he would come in a little bit early and take care of it before the staff would arrive. That way they wouldn't have to worry about catching up and could just start the day as normal. Dropping the coat onto one of the chairs tucked away into the back of the kitchen, he pulled off his gloves and set them beside it so that they wouldn't get wet by the sink. Rolling up the sleeves of his black dress shirt, he made sure they wouldn't fall down before heading over to the sink to start the dishwater. Just as he was first dipping his hands into the warm water, the sound of the winery door opening again caught D-Luke's ear and caused him to look up towards the entrance. A sigh slipped past his lips as he realized who had come to join him. Turning his gaze away and back towards the dishes at hand in disinterest. "This is a winery, Sir Alberic, not a bed and breakfast. There won't be anything served till later." D-Luke spoke dismissively, resigning himself to the fate of Kaya, loitering around until he finally was served something after D-Luke finished what he was washing. "I'm aware. Then why are you?" Certainly there was no reason for Kaya to be there, other than wanting something from D-Luke, whether it be food, drink, or pestering for his involvement in something or other with the Knights. So when it wasn't the first two, D-Luke was sure it probably had to be the third, and finally gave Kaya his attention by turning his head over his shoulder to look at him. However, his words fell short when he noticed Kaya taking off his gloves and rolling up his sleeves after shrugging off his jacket, just as D-Luke had minutes earlier. "Where do you keep the drying towels?" Kaya asked innocently, tucking his gloves into his pocket. "Kaya, put your gloves back on. You don't need to help me with this. Don't the Knights have things for you to do?" D-Luke's eyes briefly locked on to the harsh scarring that coated Kaya's now visible palms, snapping himself out of it by bringing his eyes up to the cavalry captain's face. "They can wait. I want to help you. Drying towels?" D-Luke could hardly believe what he was hearing, but the way that Kaya was talking about it seemed so normal that he felt weird making a big deal out of it. Clearing his throat, he gestured towards their location and turned back to washing the plate in his hand. Second top drawer to the left. Watching out of the corner of his eye as he continued the washing and rinsing, D-Luke noticed Kaya find the towels and select one out, beginning to carefully wipe them down before putting each one away in the cupboards. The two of them fell into silence as they worked through the small pile that had been left the night before. D-Luke standing in place at the sink while Kaya tutted about behind him, drying the dishes and figuring out where they belonged in the winery kitchen. The dishes wouldn't get put away as fast this way, or properly either, because Kaya spends his time on the other side of the serving counter. But D-Luke only quietly resolved to simply fix anything that was out of place once he left. He didn't want to break the somewhat comfortable quiet that had settled between them. Normally, D-Luke liked to do these kinds of chores alone, or really any task around the winery he undertook that didn't require more than one person, but he could say that he didn't mind Kaya being here as much as he thought he would when he first walked in. He still couldn't get over the pang of regret in his chest every time he saw a glimpse of Kaya's palms. If anything was the focus of D-Luke's early morning reflections and thoughts, it was his actions the night after Crapus passed. Oh, he didn't regret leaving the Knights or taking those 3 years away from Mondstadt, certainly. But attacking Kaya after he confessed his origins to D-Luke and vocalized his struggle with loyalty, attacking him to the point where the Cryo-Archon had to intervene or Kaya wouldn't have survived. Sure, D-Luke still didn't trust Kaya, even now, but the 3 years of time that Kaya protected Mondstadt at least told D-Luke that currently Kaya didn't have any ill intentions towards the people there. Plus, he had returned D-Luke's vision to him when he returned, and D-Luke still kept the vase in his winery. There was really no need for D-Luke to be so sharp with him, other than the fact that D-Luke believed Kaya would never forgive him for what he had done, and therefore would simply not allow him the possibility. There's no need to feel guilty, D-Luke. Kaya's voice snapped him out of his thoughts, bringing D-Luke back enough for him to realize that he had been staring. They don't hurt anymore, and I can still use my hands just fine. Kaya put down the dish he had been drying, holding up his hands and flexing them as if to show D-Luke that they still could function normally. We both didn't make good choices that night. I mean, directly after. Kaya continued, chuckling softly to lighten the air and remind D-Luke that he didn't hold such hard feelings anymore. That was a pretty terrible time to come out of it. D-Luke finally responded quietly after finding the ability to breathe again, tearing his gaze away from Kaya, even though he had just stared at the sink instead. It was. I shouldn't have attacked you. It was the closest that D-Luke would get to an apology, since he wasn't sure if that was what Kaya was offering himself at the moment. Still, he wanted to express the guilt that he felt regarding his actions, if only to convey that he had no real intentions of hurting Kaya anymore. No. But I understand why you did. There was no bite to Kaya's response, no jab about his father, no judgment from a wrong party, just from the tone. Not even looking at him, D-Luke could tell that Kaya didn't hold it against him, even if D-Luke still had it against himself. The silence returned once again as D-Luke continued with the few dishes that were left, catching up to the rate that Kaya was drying them and putting them away. In order to not stand there awkwardly, D-Luke busied himself with wiping down the sink and other counters, finding little things to straighten it and keep moving. He had settled into the uncomfortable feeling that rested in his chest, though it was hard to place exactly what it was there for. Bittersweet nostalgia, maybe? A hesitant hope that maybe this was Kaya's way of trying to reach out to D-Luke and reminding him that Kaya didn't actually hate D-Luke as much as D-Luke didn't actually hate Kaya either. Simply the fact that he was missing his brother. All those things at the same time? This goes on the top shelf with the other trays, correct? Kaya was the one to break the quiet once again and bring D-Luke back, holding up the last serving dish that needed to be dried and put away. Yes. Right. It was the sound of Kaya putting away the last dish, then turning to put his jacket back on, redon the gloves that covered those telling scars on his hands. Well, my job here is done. I shall be back later when you are serving drinks. Hardly unexpected, D-Luke could almost certainly always see Kaya at Dawn Winery or the Angel's Share most nights. It was a perfect bookend to signal to D-Luke that although this conversation was not one they normally had, that it didn't change anything for the worse between them, and even left the unspoken offer for more conversation later if they wanted to pursue it. At least that's what D-Luke possibly hoped it could be, though he'd never asked for clarification. Have a good rest of your morning, Master D-Luke. Kaya paused at the door to say this before heading out, the heavy wooden door almost swinging closed before D-Luke was able to respond, though he doubted Kaya had heard him, but it didn't matter. You as well, Kaya. So, there we go. How many dishes does it take to repair a relationship? Well, according to this, not that many. At least one day's worth, at minimum, and it wasn't even that much of a day. So, I hope you have enjoyed it. Links down below, once again, for those if you want to share the fanfiction or the author. I'm sure they have other very fine works you can pursue. If you would like to see more, let me know in the comments below. Each of these things makes YouTube happier to push my little readings of these stories I find to the upper reaches of the internet, or at least to different corners. So anytime you share it, it helps me out. And hey, you can do that for free. Ain't that a grand old thing? But on top of it all, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And ta-ta for now.